In the late 1800s, a series of suspicious deaths surrounded an Irish woman living in the Catskills of New York. There were multiple dead husbands, multiple fires, multiple stints in jail, and even the death of a stepson and 2 women. Eventually, it would come to light that she was either truly insane or a stone-cold serial killer who was just cunning enough to fake insanity. This is the story of Lizzie Halliday, the worst woman on earth. Hey, y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potter. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our friends all the way over there in Ghana.
Ghana?
Yep. Wozan.
Very nice.
There you go.
Well, wherever you're listening, be sure to hit that subscribe button, then like, rate, and review the podcast so others who like true crime just like you can find us. And if you're watching us on YouTube right now, hit that subscribe button below. You can find us on Instagram at Hitched to Homicide or on X at H2H_podcast. And if you want true crime every single day, all you got to do is go to Facebook.
Yep.
Go join our closed Facebook group, The In-Laws and Outlaws. All you have to do is go to Facebook, type in H2H In-Laws and Outlaws, answer a couple questions, you're in, go join.
Yes.
Lots of fun in there.
Great people.
You get extra information like the fact that Rob and I have both had COVID and we had to take a week off.
Yep. Nasty stuff. But it happens.
It does.
And we prevailed.
We did. We survived. We came through it. I got it first, then I gave it to him. You know, it's the gift that just keeps on giving, right?
Yep.
We also now have a Buy Me a Coffee link if you want to send Rob some coffee.
Yes, we do. And I have to thank Christy and Sully because they sent me my very first Buy Me a Coffee. So
Cups of coffee. He's got 2 cups of coffee. He's going to drink them both today.
Yeah, so thank you, Christy and Sully. I really appreciate it.
You can find that link in our show notes. We appreciate all your messages and emails. Thank you for being with us each and every week. And some of you, speaking of messages, some of you have been sending us messages on our Send Chris and Rob a Text.
Yeah.
So I thought I would share a few.
Yeah, we've gotten some nice ones.
From Taylorsville, Kentucky, Rob should do a mob podcast.
I didn't know we had that one.
From Somerset, Kentucky, you guys are the best. My entire family listens to you. We live in Somerset, Kentucky. I always feel so cool when I know where you're talking about. I just wanted to tell you guys that we really appreciate everything you do. Your podcast is the reason my mother and I have a common interest and we can talk about the cases.
We're just bringing families together.
She said we are complete opposites, so it's nice to have a subject we both like. Thank you. Please never stop.
That's awesome.
From Newton, Kansas. Hi there. I love the show. Think you should do a show about the BTK, the serial killer here in Kansas. We're gonna. He's on the list. I've been researching him. Cases like that, it takes me a little bit because I really want to get the good research in.
A lot of detail in those.
Also from Australia.
Oh,
Hi, Chris, Rob, and Scotty. I just listened to your story on Leonard Fraser. Just wanted to let you know that Natasha Ryan passed away in early June.
Oh.
She suicided on the Rockhampton golf course.
Wow.
You also did amazing with the pronunciation with the Australian towns. Thank you. Have a great day. This is from Julie. P.S. Thank you for being my favorite podcast.
Oh, thanks, Julie.
And finally, from Phoenix, Arizona, Kristen Robb, thank you for such a wonderfully entertaining podcast. I've been a faithful listener since the very beginning, and even before that. I walk every day, but Wednesdays are my favorite. Although I do have a true crime podcast playlist, I will often listen to previous episodes of H2H instead, as I enjoy them so much.
Nice.
Thanks for doing what you do.
That's awesome.
I will keep reading those to y'all.
Yeah.
All you have to do is go in. There's a little, at the very top of all the show notes, it says, send Chris and Rob a message. Just click on that. And from wherever you are in the world, you can send us a little note.
Yeah. And know that we really do appreciate and we read all of them.
We read everything, even the bad ones.
Yeah. And there's a few bad ones.
Even the ones where you don't like something.
Yeah.
They're all read.
Yep.
Well, I spent some time in the Catskills of New York right after I got COVID.
Yep.
This was a couple of weeks ago. It's so charming. The Catskills were named by early Dutch settlers and were a favorite destination for vacationers from New York City in the mid-20th century. It's also the backdrop of today's story, where our killer is the most notorious of the Catskills.
Wow.
Before we get started, let me thank some sources. Wikipedia, All That's Interesting, New York Almanac, Find a Grave, Hudson Valley Magazine, The Irish Times, Tunkhannock Republican, Poughkeepsie Eagle News, The Courier News, The Anaconda Standard, and the Wilkes-Barre Times Leader.
Those were some tongue twisters.
I'm sorry if I messed anything up. I apologize.
They're perfect. All right. Well, you ready?
I am.
Let's do it.
Eliza Margaret McNally was born in County Antrim, Ireland in 1864, and she immigrated to the United States in 1867.
Okay.
And in every single piece of literature, every little article, and I read a bunch of newspapers from the late 1800s, she was called a criminal prodigy.
Yeah. Well, I guess you got to have a goal.
I guess so. She marries her first husband, Charles Hopkins. He was an older fella. She has a type, by the way. She's also only 15 years old when she marries this guy.
Really?
And Charles wasn't really his name. Charles was from Greenwich, New York. He was a Civil War deserter. So he also went by another name, Ketzpool. Ketzpool Brown.
Wow.
Charles and Lizzie had one son. His name was Charlie, and old Charles died 2 years after their marriage in 1879.
Wow.
It was a death of mysterious circumstances. It raised a few eyebrows, apparently more than the old guy marrying a 15-year-old. She will say he died of typhoid fever. Charlie, their son, is going to be taken from Lizzie later on in life because she is, quote, insane, end quote. He's going to go live in a home or an orphanage.
Okay.
In 1881, after Charles Hopkins, she then married another old guy who was living off his military pension. These military pensions are from the Civil War, okay?
Wow.
She's 15 when she marries the first one. This guy's name is Artemus Brewer, and I read that he was a, quote, village character and was crippled by rheumatism as from the wounds he received in the war. He was a little short man with an enormously large head, straggle whiskers, and very large feet. He walked with not one but two canes.
He was the model for current day Warner Brothers cartoon characters, actually.
Yeah, end quote. That was in the newspaper when they were talking about him.
Wow.
He was little, but he had a big head.
Wow.
They didn't pull any punches, man. She was actually mean to Artemis, and the people in the town said that she had her, quote, moods, and she threw, quote, tantrums. She liked to walk, and when Artemis was feeling especially bad, she would make him walk with her. So this is a guy all hunched over with two canes.
Wow.
He would die less than a year after they said I do. The New York Times will later write, quote, whether these men died natural deaths or were murdered is not known, end quote.
Wow.
I did read that the official cause of death for Artemis was heart failure.
Okay.
Her next venture into marriage was Hiram Perkinson. He's a widower with 3 grown daughters. He fled, leaving Lizzie within their first year of marriage. So these two got a divorce. And according to Lizzie, after living with him for a few months, he's a stonemason, by the way, she finds out that he was secretly married to a woman named Mrs. Ada Gunn. She's now a widow and a divorcee, and according to her, she became a, quote, little washerwoman, end quote.
What's a little washerwoman?
She's taking in laundry.
Oh, okay.
So she's been twice widowed, and now she's divorced, and to make money, she starts washing clothes for people.
So
a little washerwoman, that's what she called herself.
Okay, so like today, I mean, if your spouse passes away, you get insurance money or pensions or whatever. So, but in those days, the war pension didn't go to the spouse, correct?
I'm not certain. Okay. I mean, this is a Civil War pension.
Yeah.
I don't think so, because she always talks about the fact that they really didn't leave her anything. Okay. All these men, none of them really left her anything.
Yeah, I would just assume so, yeah.
Yeah. But she becomes this washerwoman. She's taking in clothes and washing them. And this is how she met her next husband, George Smith.
Okay.
He was bringing her his wash. And according to Lizzie, quote, in a few weeks, it wasn't months, he wanted to marry me, end quote.
Okay.
So she promptly married George Smith, another Civil War vet, who was a friend of husband number 2, Artemis Brewer.
So she's not even in her 20s yet.
Not yet.
Good Lord. Wow.
She doesn't live a very long life.
Okay.
So George Smith, her new husband, was friends with Artemis Brewer because they served together in the war. And after a few months of wedded bliss, things went downhill. She fought with him and one day picked up a flat iron and hurled it at him.
Jeez.
He dodged it. She would fight him and tell him she was going to kill him.
Wow.
She stole his money, everything he had saved, $14.50, and she wouldn't give it back, and she wouldn't tell him where it was. And she would stomp around the house and break things and throw little tantrums. And one thing that George loved was his feather bed because his first wife had made it for him. So she promptly took a knife to the bed and ripped it to pieces.
Wow.
And in fact, George had said to protect the feather bed. He told the people that worked there in their house, whatever you do, protect my feather bed. And when a woman who lived in the house, she rented a room, tried to protect this bed, her name is Mrs. Beringer, she and Lizzie get in a fight and Lizzie beat her up.
Jeez.
Yeah, just to get to that bed.
Oh.
After this, when the feathers are flying, Lizzie was arrested. And when Lizzie came into the courtroom to be tried, she had a petticoat tied around her waist and was carrying her shoes in her hand. She danced and sang around the courtroom. Lizzie wanted an insanity plea.
Okay.
But the judge wasn't buying what she was selling, and he fined her $12.60. And with that, she was no longer crazy. But she was begging George to pay the fine. But George is flat broke because Lizzie stole all his money.
She stole his $14.
So she asks him if he would pay the fine if she told him where the $14.50 was.
Oh, man. Actually, I would have just said, okay, tell me where it is. She tells him, and then he goes.
And then never paid it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he paid her fine.
Oh, jeez. Dummy.
And after this happens, Hiram Parkinson, the guy that she divorced, was back in town. And she started staying away at night and with him. I mean, they're divorced.
Jeez.
After this, she tried to kill George by giving him a cup of poisoned tea.
Wow.
She laced it with arsenic And when he didn't die, she packed up everything that wasn't nailed down and moved to Bellows Falls, Vermont.
Okay.
George actually came home one night. He's locked out. He climbs through a window and discovers that the house is empty. She'd taken everything. Quote, I never followed her. I thought I was lucky to escape with my life. End quote.
Yeah, I'm going to say George was lucky.
In Vermont, she married a man named Charles Plaistel. Now, mind you, she's still married to George Smith, who she tried to poison.
And what number is this?
This is, she's going to end up having 5 total.
Okay. So is this number 5?
This is number 4.
Okay.
I think this is number 4.
I don't have my program with me, so I'm not sure who the players are.
I'm pretty sure it's number 4.
All right.
But Lizzie disappeared after about 2 weeks. And later she will say he was, quote, a pretty man, short and stout and fair, a heavy drinker, dearie, but I never believed what people said about him. He was a painter and paper hanger by trade. He was a lovely husband. He always gave all of his money to me, end quote.
Seems to be a common thread here. Wow.
But then she says that she found out that he beat his first wife, so she ran away.
Okay.
She went to her mother's home. She went home to her mother.
All right.
But Charlie followed, so she ran away from there. And when she surfaces again, it's the winter of 1888, and she's in Philadelphia at a saloon on North Front Street that was run by the McQuillan family. Mm-hmm. And the McQuillans were friends that Lizzie knew from Ireland. The McQuillans lived near the McNallys, her maiden name, in Ireland, in the motherland.
All right.
And when Sam McNally, Lizzie's father, came to America with his family in 1807, he found Tom McQuillan with his wife and 3 sons living in Newburgh, New York. And Lizzie actually moves in with the McQuillans while she's living in Philadelphia. Lizzie changes her name to Maggie Hopkins, and she set up a little shop in Philly.
Okay.
Now, I couldn't find out what kind of little shop she had.
Yeah.
But after she sets it all up, she insures it, and then she promptly burns it to the ground to collect the insurance money.
By the way, I did look it up, and it was called Suds and Duds. I'm just kidding.
The little washerwoman. She wasn't washing clothes. I'm assuming it's like a little dry goods store or something.
I'm sure.
But she burns this business to the ground, and that little trick resulted in her first stint in prison. She served 2 years in Philadelphia's Eastern Penitentiary for the crime. And this is when they took her son, Charlie, away from her. Remember, I said they were going to take him away.
Yeah.
When Lizzie is released, she goes by the name Lizzie Brown, and she took a job as a housekeeper for a twice-widowed 70-year-old farmer living in Burlingame, New York, an area called Walker Valley. Okay. His name is Paul Halliday.
All right.
Paul was also a Union Army vet.
Wow.
He's 70.
Oh, man.
But he'd bought himself a little farm in Sullivan County, New York after the war. And there, along with his wife, he raised 5 children. But by the end of the 1880s, his wife was dead and 4 of his kids were married and had moved away, leaving Paul to care for the one son who does live with him. His name was John, and John had special needs. He's 35 years older, and he's actually older than Lizzie.
Wow.
The son is actually older than Lizzie.
Yeah.
According to one source, Paul, her new husband, was depressed. He spent a lot of his time and money at a local tavern, but when a young Irish girl named Lizzie Brown became his live-in housekeeper, his life soon brightened up.
I'm going to say just for a little bit, though.
Just for a little while. And as you might have guessed, she married him too, just 6 weeks after she started working for him.
Gee whiz.
According to the New York Times, quote, their married life does not seem to have been pleasant, end quote. Well, we'll get to that.
All right.
Paul's neighbors thought he was a fool for marrying the young girl, and soon these same neighbors started to be afraid of Lizzie. She was short and stout with reddish hair and a pointed nose. She had dark blue sunken eyes and a heavy brow. This is the way the newspaper describes her.
All right.
People thought her eyes were evil, that she, quote, had serpent's eyes, end quote.
Man.
But more than that, Lizzie was crazier than a shithouse rat. I'm just going to say it.
Yep.
She was odd. She would wander through the woods in the middle of the night, and Paul's neighbors thought she was a gypsy, and they all stayed away from her. And there actually was a band of gypsies that lived near the Halliday farm, and Lizzie was always friends with them. And in the late 1880s, it wasn't like the gypsies from My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, if you've ever watched that reality show. Gypsies, the Romany people, were thought not just to be criminals, but they were into the occult, like fortune-telling and witchcraft.
Well, and too, also, back in the day, redheads were known to be,
A witch.
A witch, a devil worshiper. There were these evil connotations to redheads.
And you're saying what, honey? That is different now?
Well, what can I say?
There is a little something to that. Don't get a redhead mad.
Oh, yeah.
It takes a lot to get Rob there, but once that switch is flipped, you better look out. And that goes for all of my redheaded friends. Every single one of them. They're just like that. Nicest people in the world. Don't before
don't
get too far with them.
People
Don't
start
make them
interpreting that it has nothing to do with Chris. I never lose it to Chris. It's always stupid things on the outside world.
It's other people that he gets angry with.
The outside world drives me nuts.
Yeah, did I not make that clear?
I just want to make sure.
No.
Okay.
No, you are a model husband, sweetheart. He sleeps with one eye open.
I do.
Just kidding. But these gypsies are into the occult and fortune-telling and witchcraft. And some of them did make a living telling fortunes. I mean, think about it. It's always the gypsy woman with the crystal ball that you see.
Sure.
And the Romany people were actually originally from, get this, India.
Really?
Traveling through Turkey and Iran. And by the 14th century, they were all throughout Europe.
Wow.
And the term gypsy comes from the belief that these people were from Egypt because of their dark skin.
Huh.
Egypt, gypsy.
Amazing.
And that concludes your history lesson for this podcast.
As Johnny Carson would say, I did not know that.
Yeah, I didn't know it. Egypt, gypsy. That's where it comes from.
Okay.
But getting back to the story, Paul's friends and neighbors thought Lizzie was a gypsy woman. And the biggest flaw in their marriage was that Lizzie had these sporadic, quote, spells of insanity, end quote. And that's a little bit of an understatement because after these two marry, the farmhouse at the Halliday place catches fire. Lizzie rushed to tell the neighbors, but it was too late. Lizzie will claim that she and John, the special needs son who's 35 years old, that John died trying to save her from the fire. But when they go in and inspect the house and decide that the fire was deliberately set, they discover that John was actually locked in his bedroom.
Oh.
And Lizzie was in possession of the only key.
Wow.
And everyone knew that Lizzie didn't like Paul's special needs son, John. So the neighbors are thinking that she started the fire to kill John, or even murdered him before she started the fire to cover up the fact that she had murdered John.
Right.
So Lizzie is arrested, but the authorities didn't have enough to charge her with a crime.
Right.
Still, the day after the fire, Paul went to the Newburgh officials. He's got tears in his eyes, and he said that he believed that his wife had, quote, set fire to their house after locking John up in his room, end quote.
Wow.
So he kind of believes that Lizzie killed his son.
Yeah.
Not long after, Lizzie burned down Paul's barn and mill.
Good Lord.
She admitted to these, saying that the barn was old and she wanted a new one. So if you want a new barn, you just burn it down. And of course, the house and the barn were insured. And he did get paid. Paul did get paid for these.
Even though it was intentional?
Even though it was intentional.
I guess they didn't have that clause in there during
I don't guess there was the arson clause in there, right? Well, no, that can't be true because she went to jail for it.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, but the insurance clause may not have been in there. They could have arrested her for arson, but.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Things have changed since then.
1 year later, in June of 1891, Paul and Lizzie stayed overnight at the home of J.B. Smith. So if you're not understanding this, she gets back together with her husband. He sort of forgives her, and they're still married. And they spend the night in this home of their friends, J.B. Smith. Paul left early the next day. He left Lizzie behind, but he discovers after he's been gone for a little bit that his wife had picked his pocket of $41.
Oh, geez.
Her plan was to leave him for good. So she went to the livery stable of Van Allen Whitback and hired a wagon and a team of horses for a couple of days. I read that she said that her mother was sick and she needed to go visit her mother. And that's why she was hiring this team of horses.
Okay.
She starts out with her hired wagon and horses, and when she makes it to West Newburgh, she runs into a man named John Glenn, not the astronaut, who was a neighbor. And she asks him if he would go on the trip with her and drive the team of horses. So John goes, and on the way, the two of them arrange to pass themselves off as husband and wife. She tells him that she's going to go trade these horses as they travel, getting the trade of each deal until they were rich. So they're going to trade the good horses for crappy ones.
Okay.
But the liveryman, Van Allen Whitback, sends out a posse to look for her.
Right.
And along his way, he finds all of his horses.
Oh, man.
She was arrested. John Glenn was released. She pled insanity and entered an asylum. So Lizzie actually dodges jail time and goes to one asylum, the Middletown Asylum, and then is transferred to another, the Auburn Asylum, and she's acting wild. She's being violent, and her violent behavior even continued during her transfer from one asylum to another. She smashed the windows of the vehicle. She attacked the sheriff.
Sounds like an episode of Cops.
I mean, she's
crazy.
like a wild animal, right?
Yeah.
They then move her to the Matawan Asylum, where she was still very violent, but the charges for the horse theft were dropped. And after that, Lizzie's mental state seemed to improve dramatically.
Wow.
Coincidence?
Yeah.
The New York Herald said, quote, hers was a remarkable career showing that she possessed whether a wonderful aptitude for crime or a strangely disturbed mind. Perhaps both of these endowments were hers, end quote. Regardless, within a couple of years, Lizzie was declared cured. She was all better. And Paul Halliday, of all people, springs her from the asylum, which just goes to prove that you can't fix stupid when you're in love. Paul takes her home to the farm. And now that she's back, the neighbors in Muckakatang, New York,
say that 10 times fast,
are staying away from not only Lizzie but Paul, because they know trouble is a brewing. In August of 1893, neighbors notice that Paul had been gone from the farm for several days, and they were worried about him. And Lizzie told everybody, including one of Paul's older sons, who's like married and moved away, that Paul was traveling, that he was in Bloomingburg for masonry work. But the neighbors didn't buy it. And a group of concerned neighbors went to the Justice of the Peace and wanted a search warrant to be carried out. They're like, she's knucking futs.
Yeah.
He's not there. She's burned down the house, the farm, the mill. She's killed his child. She went off to the asylum and now she's back and he's nowhere to be found.
Right.
And so they're like, okay, we'll go take a look. And when they went a-looking inside the house, they found blood-stained carpet, a a spent revolver cartridge, and a piece of blood-soaked rope.
Wow.
Lizzie reacts with violence when this happens, hitting one of the men on the head with a board. They calm her down, and she agreed to go with her stepson to Bloomingburg to prove that Paul was indeed alive. She's like, he's alive. You all are crazy. And she convinces her stepson, come with me.
Right.
Let's go look for him. I promise you he's there.
Mm-hmm.
But meanwhile, back at the farm, a search party keeps poking around. It's now September 4th, 1893, and when they dig through a large pile of hay in the barn, they're expecting to find Paul's body. Mind you, they actually uncover the bodies of two women.
Oh.
One middle-aged and the other younger.
Really?
Both females are naked, riddled with bullets, and they're badly decomposed. Their hands are bound across their chests, and their feet and knees were tied with rope.
Gee whiz.
They bring Lizzie back from this wild goose chase to Bloomingburg, and an inquest is conducted into the murder of Margaret and Sarah McQuillan, the wife and daughter of the man with whom she had lived in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
The people who her family were neighbors with in Ireland.
Wow.
Lizzie Halliday was arrested, and they continued to search the farm. First, they found two .38 caliber pistols. Then, when they were searching under the floorboards in the kitchen, the naked body of Paul Halliday is found. He had a fractured skull and 3 bullet wounds to his chest. He was also bound, just like Margaret and Sarah McQuillan.
Wow.
Now, while in Sullivan County Jail, Lizzie hears that they have found Paul's body, and that same day, she attempted suicide in her jail cell by removing her garter, breaking it, then twisting it around her neck and pulling with all her might. Her suicide attempt wasn't successful, but they were worried about Lizzie's safety. She was a danger to herself, but others were a danger to her, too. There's a story that a band of gypsies came to the Halliday house and declared that they were going to have the woman, meaning Lizzie.
Right.
But a group of locals formed a lynch mob saying, not if we get to her first.
Wow.
Now, neither of these things happened, and it all seemed to die down after Paul's funeral when he is buried. But while Lizzie was awaiting her trial, she refused to eat. She tried to strangle a sheriff's wife. She set her bed sheets on fire. She tried to hang herself. She tried to cut her throat and her arms with broken glass.
Jeez.
Quote, for the last 3 months, it has been necessary to keep her chained to the floor,
Good.
End quote.
Wow.
They're kind of treating her like the animal she is.
Yeah, exactly.
Lizzie was on the front pages of many New York City newspapers, and the story was picked up around the country. I found them all. I read them all from the late 1800s, and buddy, there was some flowery prose in there. One of the biggest articles written was by a crack investigative journalist named Nellie Bly, who went to the jailhouse twice to interview Lizzie, and this was her story. She tells Nellie Bly that there was a gang that was killing and robbing peddlers, but they would kill anything that came along. They had parties in town, and they would tell girls in disreputable houses that if they steal money or jewelry, they can find them a place to hide it, and then hide them in Walker Valley. And they don't help the girls, they kill the girls. She won't say who these people are. Quote, I dare not tell on them or they will kill me, end quote. Now, it's later going to be discovered that there were some murders around the time that Lizzie's murders were happening, when she's killing people.
Right.
And there is a theory that Lizzie was working with the gypsies, that she had help.
Okay.
But she tells Nellie Bly that this gang had killed 2 old men, sailors, who they drugged and then shot. 2, quote, bad girls who had stolen pocketbooks were killed the same night in the same way, end quote. And when Lizzie tells her what happened to those bodies, she tells them they were put in the barn and burned, so there would be, quote, nothing left to tell the story, end quote.
Except bones. Okay.
So this investigative reporter is sitting in the jail cell with her, asking her these questions.
Right.
And Nellie asks her what was the next murder. And Lizzie tells her it was some peddlers and two girls who thought they were going to a ball. Quote, they put on their best clothes and all their jewelry, and when they got to our house, they said, we thought you were taking us to a ball. Have you brought us here to murder us? End quote.
Okay.
So she's saying this happened at her house.
Yeah.
Lizzie says the girls were drugged and shot and their bodies chopped up into pieces, the largest not being more than a pound. The killers are going to take the pieces and parts to the river at night. But Nellie Bly asks her to tell her about the McQuillan murders. Lizzie tells her there were more people murdered that same night, more peddlers. And when she says peddlers, I think she's just talking about people who live on the street.
Right. Transits.
They were drugged so that when they reached the shanty, they had to lift them out of the wagon, one taking the head and the other taking the feet to get them into the house. Quote, then they were undressed and shot, end quote.
Wow.
And when Nellie Bly asks her where they were shot, she replies, quote, where it would do the most good. Placing her hand over her heart,
Ooh.
Quote, they were always shot in the heart and many times to make a sure job, end quote.
You know, I'm no physician or forensic scientist, but I think one shot to the heart will probably kill you. I don't know.
I think it probably would.
Yeah.
So she asks Lizzie, what did they do with the bodies? And Lizzie says, quote, how do I know, dear? I only know it took 3 nights to bury all the bodies, end quote.
Wow. Gee whiz. Oh, man.
And Nellie says, you mean your husband, the peddlers, and the McQuillan women? And Nellie says, quote, yes, end quote.
Wow.
She tells Nellie, when she's asked why she killed the McQuillan women, that, quote, I didn't do it. I was outside looking in the window. I had nothing to do with it. I saw a bullet fired into my husband's heart, and I saw a man pull him over to the corner. The McQuillan women were sitting on the sofa, and then he shot them, end quote. When Nellie asks if they were drugged, Lizzie said yes, but then changed her mind and said, quote, I heard one moan when she was hit, and then she opened her eyes and said, quote, my God, did you bring me here to murder me, end quote.
Okay, now the next question is, if she's outside looking in, how did she hear her moan?
Yeah, how does she know exactly where they go in the corner, on the couch? Yeah,
whatever.
So Lizzie starts giving all these details. Her husband was shot before the women, but after the peddlers, that the women moaned a great deal, but enough shots were put in at last to finish them. She told Nellie Bly that drugged people don't bleed as much, and that horse blankets were placed under the bodies to soak up the blood. So she has a whole lot of details for somebody who was watching through the window, just like you said, right?
Right.
She goes through all her marriages with Nellie Bly, 5 total, Hopkins, Brewer, Parkinson, Smith, Plaistel, and then Paul Halliday. Then the neighbor she pretended to be married to, John Glenn, that she stole horses with.
Right.
Her trial began on June 19th, 1894 in Sullivan County, Monticello, New York. The courthouse was teeming with people. Every seat was taken. District Attorney David S. Hill told the jury the story of finding the naked body of Sarah J. McQuillan under a heap of stable filth, riddled with bullets. Her mother's body, Margaret, was also found with her. And they've, of course, found her husband's body under the floorboards of her kitchen. But it's the murder of Sarah and Margaret that Lizzie is on trial for first.
Okay.
All 3 bodies were filled with bullets. And the DA, Mr. Hill, tells the jury that the bullets fit a pistol found in the possession of Lizzie Halliday.
Right, yeah.
Testifying against Lizzie, who I read was wearing a brown dress, she was pale and sat all day picking at the seams of her sleeves. When the defense opens their arguments on June 21st, 2 days later, Lizzie's attorney, George Carpenter, asks for the case to be dismissed. Just this. We got to throw this out. Lizzie's crazy.
Yeah.
We're doing this based on Lizzie's state of mind.
Here we go again.
And the deputy sheriff who knew Lizzie after the horse stealing incident told the jury that Lizzie was, quote, wild as a hawk during those 3 months. She wouldn't eat anything, and after 2 days, I fed her with a spoon. While she was in jail, she never slept during the first 2 weeks, but kept me awake yelling, Pa, Ma, Nancy.
Okay, who's Nancy?
I guess it's a sister.
Okay.
Her looks were wild and her habits filthy. I took her from the jail at Newburgh to the asylum at Middletown. In my opinion, she was insane then, and she's insane now, end quote.
Okay, whatever.
Then during the noon recess, Dr. Edward Mann of the Flatbush Insane Asylum in Brooklyn, New York, examined her, and she promptly gets violent. She kicked him in the stomach and called him a damn hypocrite. She spit in his face. Then he started asking her questions like, how is your father? And she replies, quote, I washed her skirt. I washed her skirt, end quote.
Wow.
Then she made some, quote, wily remarks, end quote, and complained of having indigestion because she'd eaten an orange. They asked her name, what is your name? And she replied, quote, 19 skunks, end quote.
Oh, man.
Back in court, one of Lizzie's doctors said he thought she was insane, but he might be wrong. Can you imagine having that guy up on the witness stand?
Yeah.
I think she's insane, but I might be wrong. He didn't think she'd been right since she left the Middletown Asylum in February of 1892. But he tells the court that he didn't think Lizzie was smart enough to fake being insane. And a third doctor said that Lizzie was, quote, simulating insanity, end quote. She's faking it.
Yeah.
After the jury deliberated, they arrived at a verdict. Quote, we do say upon our oath that Margaret J. McQuillan and Sarah J. McQuillan came to their deaths from bullets fired from a pistol in the hands of Lizzie Halliday.
Ooh.
That said, Margaret was killed on or about August 30th and Sarah on or about September 2nd. End quote.
Wow.
Lizzie Halliday was convicted of the murder of Sarah McQuillan and sentenced to death by electrocution on August 6th. She would have been the first woman to be executed in the electric chair in New York. But Governor Roswell P. Flower, on the advice of a commission that was formed to judge her sanity, commuted Lizzie's sentence to life in prison. And when her death sentence was commuted, they moved her from prison to the Mattawan Hospital for the Criminally Insane.
Wow.
But that's not where the story ends.
Of course not.
In March of 1915, Lizzie tried to take her own life. She shredded the bedsheet and made a noose, then attached it to the bed and her wrists and her neck and pulled on it. An attendant caught her and stopped her from strangling herself. She's hardly a model prisoner. She tried to escape several times and attacked many prison workers. But after 12 years in the asylum, Lizzie is one of the most trusted patients there. She even appeared in plays produced by the inmates.
Really? Wow.
Her good behavior was attributed to the attention of a young nurse named Nellie Wicks.
Okay.
Lizzie really liked Nellie, but in 1906, Nellie decided to leave the asylum and become a private nurse. And Lizzie was devastated, and she threatened to kill Nellie if she tried to leave. But no one took Lizzie's threat seriously. And on September 27th, 1906, Lizzie followed Nellie Weeks into the bathroom, locked the door, and began stabbing her with a pair of scissors.
Good Lord.
Lizzie stabbed Nellie over 200 times.
Holy Moses.
And her favorite nurse, Nellie, died 2 hours later.
Wow.
After this, Lizzie lived in obscurity at the mental hospital. She died there at the Mattawan Hospital for the Criminally Insane on June 18th, 1918 of kidney disease. When she did, the New York Times ran an article calling her the worst woman on earth.
There's a reputation you want to get. Jeez.
So 5 husbands, She probably killed 4 of them that we know of. The one that was divorced and got away.
Yeah.
Or maybe there were 2 that got away, I should say.
Yeah.
But then she killed all these other people around her, even the people that were taking care of her the closest, like the little nurse.
Yeah.
But that is the story of Lizzie Halliday, and that's all I have to say about that. For nearly 7 years, Jane Doe has lived in the shadows, her past buried deep beneath layers of secrecy and silence. After completing more than was asked of her in her last assignment for the enigmatic Kaiwolf project, Jane Doe vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of dead bodies and unanswered questions. But now, as the specter of her past returns with a vengeance, Jane finds herself thrust back into a world she thought she'd left behind forever. When her former sins come knocking on her door, Jane is faced with an impossible choice: continue to hide in the shadows, or once again take up arms against the forces that threaten to tear apart the fabric of society. With enemies lurking around every corner and allies who may not be what they seem, Jane must rely on her wits, training, and her unyielding determination to survive. And while trust is a luxury she cannot afford, Jane must confront the truth about herself and her past. As the clock ticks, she realizes that the line between family, friend, and foe are razor thin, and in the end, the only person she can rely on is herself. Jane Doe 4 Charlotte is available September 24th, 2024. No name, no regrets, no mercy.
You know, the most amazing thing to me about this whole story is the fact that she's like marrying these guys, 4, 5, 6 weeks after she meets them.
Yeah, and they're all way older than she is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just nuts. I mean, we got engaged 4 months after we married, or after we met, and we looked at each other and thought we were both nuts. But,
We're like, we're crazy, but I think we're going to go ahead and do this.
Yeah, but 17 years later, whatever.
Well, there are a lot of people out there who have bad exes, and I would have to say Lizzie's the worst. Lizzie's the worst. But one of the sheriffs that actually took care of her when she was in jail, he actually floated the idea that Lizzie was Jack the Ripper before she came to America.
Oh. Which
is pretty funny because the crimes aren't even close to being similar, and she came to America when she was a little girl.
Right.
But everybody had a theory about old Lizzie. Yeah. Other than she was just knucking futs.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, let's get away from Lizzie.
See ya, Lizzie.
Let's everybody get away from Lizzie.
Agreed.
Yeah, okay. And do a little bless your heart.
Well, bless your heart.
All right. This first one I'm calling I'm Not Dead Yet.
We do a lot of I'm Not Dead Yet.
Yep. A 70-year-old woman was sentenced to 1.5 years in prison for defrauding insurers by faking deaths and staging sham funerals while she worked at a Los Angeles mortuary.
What?
Yeah. Jean Crump, 70, prepared bogus death certificates, bought a burial plot, and in one instance buried a casket in a phony funeral, authorities said.
Is she getting money from this?
Well, here you go. When insurers began to investigate, Crump exhumed a bodiless casket, filled it with a mannequin and cow bones to throw off cremation workers, and had it cremated.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, according to court papers is what it said. The judge sentenced the elderly woman to prison because she showed little remorse.
Oh.
I know.
So you can be a bad old lady.
You can.
And not just a cute little old lady.
Yeah, and find a bunch of cow bones. Okay,
yeah.
Number 2, Jerry.
Are we a Jerry Springer?
Yep.
Is there going to be a fight?
Yep. A North Carolina man was sentenced to 3 days in jail for violating probation by leaving the state to appear on the Jerry Springer Show.
Oh, my gosh.
Richard Peterson's probation officer spotted him on the TV program. Yep. Peterson, who was 30, and his girlfriend got an all-expense-paid trip to Connecticut to appear on Springer, where Peterson boasted about a one-night stand with a stripper.
Oh, my gosh.
Yep. Police said a video clip showed Peterson dodging swings from his girlfriend. While the couple fought, the stripper started twirling around a pole. The stripper and Peterson's girlfriend then turned on each other. Peterson was on probation for possession of marijuana and resisting an officer.
Oh my gosh. That's some good reality television right there, man.
I'm going to say in the top 5 Jerry Springer shows, that's probably up there.
Turns twirling on a pole.
While they're beating the crap out of each other.
Oh my gosh.
All right.
I don't know how you're going to beat that one.
Well, this is a good one. Number 3, losing on appeal.
Like a banana peel?
Well, a Washington State man in a banana costume.
I got it right.
You did. Is accused of exposing himself and brandishing a shotgun while riding around with a bunch of friends. The Peninsula Daily News reported that the costume man exposed himself at a restaurant, then drove around a neighborhood with a man and a woman waving the weapon.
Wait a second. If he's got on a banana costume, is he like lifting up the banana costume?
I'm sure the zipper was strategically placed.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, it says he was waving the weapon. I'm not sure which weapon he was waving.
Don't know what he was waving.
Yeah, exactly. After his arrest, the man couldn't explain why he was in a banana suit. Police arrested the other man, but the woman was allowed to leave. All right. The banana costume was seized as evidence.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, bless his heart.
I hope they held it with gloves on.
Oh my God. Oh, those are your wacky bless your hearts this
Those
week.
were good. Those were good. Well, if you have a bless your heart or you know somebody's heart who needs a blessing, all you got to do is go to hitchtahomicide.com. When you get there, there's a pull-down menu. Yep. And while you're there, you can also suggest a case or tell us about your brush with true crime.
Please do.
We're happy to be back after a week off.
Yeah.
That's my amazing husband out there.
It's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.